Hi, Christina and Andrew. I just want to make sure that you can hear us okay.
Morning, I can hear you just fine.
Yep, I can hear you too.
Good, and we can hear you. I don't know why things work here at Oroville better than Chico. Christina and Andrew, just so you know, we're waiting for a couple more board members. We do have a quorum, but we're missing two.
Okay, thank you.
Well, everyone, welcome to the Wyandotte Creek Groundwater Sustainability Agency Special Meeting of May 11th, 2023. Please join me in a salute to the flag of our nation. Ready? Salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Board Member Connolly,
Here.
Board Member Goodson, Board Member Bynum,
Here.
Board Member Daly,
Here.
Board Member Riston.
First up is the approval of the minutes of the April 27th, 2023 board meeting. Any errors or omissions? Right?
Chairperson Conley, I have a point of clarification. The minutes are action items. Are these recorded meetings, or where is the context of the conversation recorded?
The meetings are recorded. I don't think we post them, though. We haven't posted them. We can, but they are recorded. And then the minutes are just action minutes, just recording the vote and not any summary.
Okay, but the context of the conversations is recorded. Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Smart guy, huh?
I move to approve the minutes as proposed.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Nobody opposed, so moving on. Okay. Consider Wyandotte Creek GSA fee options for long-term funding. I see Todd's got his notebook out. Like, you think we got a silver bullet or something here?
You're gonna do some good things here, and I'm recording them.
Maybe make me a co-host. Okay. All right. Thank you, Chair Connolly. I am going to share my screen real quick. Okay, how does that work? All right. All right. So just really quick before we get into the discussion and turn things over to Eddie from Ludorf and Scalmanini. I just wanted to do a quick review of where we have been and where we are today, and how we got to this place of our funding mechanism in terms of costs and the process. So just reflecting back that a few months ago, when we started this process back in essentially February, the department, the GSA, along with Ludorf, developed and identified costs for the GSA. And then we confirm those revenue needs through a budget, as well as identify and develop alternative cost allocation methods. And so here at this board, and even at our workshop, just identifying different ways that we could, different funding options that we could evaluate. And that resulted in the preparation of the technical memorandum that you considered at your last meeting. And with that technical memorandum, the result was this special board meeting to look at additional potential funding options so that could be incorporated into a fee study. So today you'll be reviewing the additional funding options and determining what you would like to include in the engineer's report or fee study. And I think Eddie will review all of this as well. So I apologize in advance for the redundancy. And then what will happen after the fee study is approved, which would be at your next meeting on the 25th, I think is the date, is that we would notice the fee and send that out to landowners. And then the cost allocation and fee approval would then be at a public hearing in July, and then the fee placed on the assessor's tax roll in August. So just kind of keeping all of that in mind of where we started and how we got here. I did want to, and so some of this information is based on lessons learned from the VINA GSA meeting that we had last night and then a month ago. So wanting to talk about the state fees that would be required. So if we didn't pass a fee, we would be put, essentially, the GSA would not be able to fund itself and be able to do some of the SIGMA compliance requirements unless we did get some funding from the grant that we submitted. So the GSA does need to administer itself, right? And that has been the directive from the Board of Supervisors with the one-time funding that we received to go through this process. And so if down the road, if we were not able to comply with SIGMA, meaning do our monitoring and data reporting requirements with the annual report, respond to DWR's comments on the GSP if we had to make any revisions, and then ultimately long range would be doing the 5-year updates. Some of those SIGMA compliance, and we would essentially be placed into a probationary period. And you hear us talking about state intervention. So I just wanted to provide what some of those things are if we were if the state were to come in and charge fees, because that has come up. And so just as this is from their website, there would be a fee per well, a $300 fee per well for those that extract groundwater. It says it excludes de minimis extractors, which are essentially residential domestic well owners. There would also be an unmanaged areas, meaning there's a difference between those put in probationary period or those that are not covered within a GSA. The county essentially serves as covers the unmanaged areas. And then there's a probationary rate, which you see here is $40 per acre foot. And again, that excludes de minimis extractors. And then there's kind of an interim plan rate. So we would, if our GSP were found to be inadequate and we're not managing our GSA, then there's all these other fees that get in place. Also, the de minimis users would have a per well fee, so they would have a fee that they have to pay. Again, they wouldn't have to provide reporting, but they would have to pay a fee. And then there's late payments. So just to give you an idea of what those costs are associated with the state, if the state were to charge fees rather than the GSA.
Okay. What's a What's considered an unmanaged area?
So typically in the GSA, the boundaries, there's the areas like within Thermalito and the city of Oroville. And if the county didn't take over what we refer to as the white areas, those would be the unmanaged areas. Is that, Christina, pop in if that's incorrect. I wasn't part of the formation of everything, but the white areas, you'll hear us sometimes refer to the white areas, and that's the county covers those. So everybody's within is being managed by either a district, the city, or the county.
I see.
All right. I also wanted to just point your attention to, in the technical memo, in the back, it's the last page of the memo, there is attachment 4. These numbers will be updated. They're just probably slightly off. Ludorf and Scalmanini now has all of the county's parcel data, and so they can make this a little, they'll be refining this a little bit. But it does give you an idea of the acreage in the basin. We use that to calculate the fees. It gives you some idea of some of the land uses with irrigated and non-irrigated, some orchard or non-orchard lands, and then as well as the acreage within the city, the member agencies, the city, Thermalito, and then the county. And then it also gives you an idea of the number of parcels. So they don't add up specifically, like when you look at irrigated, non-irrigated, and orchards, but just to give you an idea of what some of those parcels, the number of parcels that have either orchards or non-orchards, or the number of parcels within the city, et cetera. So just so you know that is in there. Sometimes we've gotten questions about, well, how many parcels are non-irrigated, how many parcels are irrigated, et cetera. So that is in your technical memo. And again, the numbers will be refined just slightly based on the current data that Ludorf has acquired. That being said, I also wanted to share this parcel, the parcel size inventory. It shows parcel sizes, the number of parcels in a range. So you have, 0.1 acre to 10 acre parcels. There's about 11,785 to be exact. And then the number of parcels between 10 and 100 acres, and then 100 to 500, and then those that are greater than 500 acres, just so you know what we're looking at in terms of various sizes and how those fees would be charged if with a cost per acre. And going over the schedule, and Eddie will probably cover this as well. So today we're here with the special board meeting. The 25th is the date that's scheduled to approve the fee report, and we'll subsequently mail the public notice of the fee, probably a couple days after that or within a week of that date. And then we today, or at your next meeting, we'll talk about if you want to turn your June meeting into an informational workshop, because the notice will have been mailed by then, and so landowners will have received news that they'll be charged a fee. The Vina GSA did choose to turn their June meeting into an informational workshop. And then right now, the fee approval protest hearing is scheduled for July 27th. And then just a reminder that the timeline that we're working in is being able to get the fee to the assessor's office by August 10th. So I just wanted to provide that just general information based on some of the questions that we've received here before, but also within the Vina GSA went through their process yesterday of approving their fee study or moving it forward, that fee. And so that was some of the questions that came up, and I didn't have that information readily available, but I do for you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eddie. Eddie's here today to continue from our last meeting and talk about the additional information that you all wanted to consider as potentially as part of your fee report. So, and he'll just do a review and then continue on with a lot of numbers. Thanks, Eddie.
The mic on? Well, I would say I'm happy to be here, but I'm not. I wasn't at the last April 27th meeting. I think my colleague was here, so we thought, can you pull the slides up? Okay. I thought it was really important just to sort of make sure everybody's on the same page in the room, online, when folks review it later, that we're all kind of, on the same page. So we're going to recap what happened from the 427 meeting, and then we're going to talk about some of the results we have from that updated fee analysis that we've been working on, and then obviously some board decisions that need to happen, and then we'll talk a little bit about next steps. So can you go to the next slide, please? Actually, just skip that one. So let's just talk about a recap of kind of where we're at, where we're headed. You've seen this schedule probably about 22 times now. Kind of lists the tasks, and then we have the sort of milestone dates. Here we are, unbelievably, we're in May. We're having a special board meeting today. We've prepared the fee option TM. It needs to be adjusted a little bit. Next steps are to approve the fee and then incorporate whatever additional sort of options you want included into that fee report. And then the other sort of scheduled dates kind of follow what Cammie had just presented previously. So we'll just kind of skim through that. Next slide is going to be a recap from the board meeting. So if we go to slide 5. Again, you've kind of seen this before, but just for folks' sort of edification, up until this point, the grants, DWR grants, local cost sharing has been kind of providing the funding mechanism. Now, as we move forward into sort of GSP implementation, we needed to talk about long-term funding and compliance, and that's kind of where we are today. So if you go to the next slide. This is sort of the approach we've been following. So as Cammie had mentioned, we work with you all for the first month or two. We've got the revenues needs established. Now we're having some difficult discussions about cost allocation, and we'll get through this. And then sort of the next step is to develop the fee and charge reports. So right now we're sort of towards the end of the cost allocation discussion. Next slide, please. So at the March meeting, there was some discussions about, how are we going to sort of allocate these fees? There was sort of a couple of options proposed. There was a sort of a uniform charge, so that would be every landowner pays the same per acre. We had some discussions about sort of the concepts of irrigated versus non-irrigated. And then in that example, we're assuming that the urban areas are all irrigated. And then there were some land use hybrid options. So the idea is, could we look at, irrigated groundwater, irrigated surface water? I think there were even discussions about kind of tying it back to sort of the agricultural practices. So that's sort of the hybrid approach that we're going to talk a little bit about today. Next slide, please. You've seen these slides before, but again, when we're looking at sort of evaluating sort of these fee options, recognizing that the federal, state, and tribal, the way I understand it, are exempt from paying the fees. You can kind of attempt to collect on the state, but they probably won't pay the bill. The parcel locations, again, as Cammie mentioned, we have publicly available data. We've requested and acquired data from Butte County, so we're kind of working through that. We have access through the annual reports to some of this land IQ data that looks at sort of water use or land use type. And then we can tie that to land use designations. Regarding water source, you heard me mention sort of surface water versus groundwater. We have some of that information, at least the best available information. So we were going to utilize some of that in some of these options we looked at. And then on the water use, typically GSA accounts have been unmetered with no water use records available. So you can see kind of what we're up against here. Next slide, please. My eyes aren't that bad, so I'm trying to look at the screen here. The criteria, have to be really careful when we look at this. It has to be sort of the revenue, the revenue needs need to be met by the inputs. It needs to be a stable revenue source. All beneficiaries pay. Equity obviously is important. That's why we're here today. And then obviously the simpler the criteria, the easier it can be. But that, as you know, is not always the most equitable case. It needs to be enforceable and obviously legally indefensible. And I think we've had legal counsel involved in all of our conversations about this. So at some point, things might get challenged, and obviously this is all being run through legal. Next slide, please. So specific to the uniform charge, so the idea behind that, again, this is a lot of background information, is we've got our total annual revenue needs, and then we just sort of look at what the accessible acreages are, and then essentially that's where we kind of distribute that revenue across all acres. That's the thought. There is some inflation and contingency numbers included in that. You're probably thinking back maybe 2 or 3 meetings ago where you saw some of those tables. We mentioned that on the accessible the acreage, the feds, state, and tribal are excluded. And then the accessible acreages, obviously we're taking out right-of-ways, roads, and those kind of things. And as always, we're trying to look at ways to come in with the lowest implementational cost. So, and these, you can just go to the next slide, Cami. Okay, now I need to go back to my notes here. All right, so on the uniform charge, again, this came up in March and I think also in April. Essentially, what we looked at was we looked at the total revenue needs, and we just divide that by the total acreage. So what that ended up working out to be on an annualized rate was about $453 per acre. So the concept is everybody pays, irrigated, non-irrigated, the same, $453 per acre. And then there's some examples beneath that initial table that shows you, hey, if you've got one acre, how much would you pay? I'm not going to go through those details, but that was the concept we presented back in March and April. So if you go to the next slide, we took it a little deeper and we said, okay, let's start looking at irrigated versus non-irrigated. So the idea is, could we apportion those costs so perhaps maybe the irrigators pay a little bit more and the non-irrigators pay less? Obviously recognizing that, we're here to talk about Sigma and groundwater sustainability. If folks are not utilizing that resource, how much skin do they have in the game? Obviously, Sigma has kind of been thrust upon the county, and you have to pay for it. But is there a more equitable way to kind of split those costs up? So that's what we looked at. If you kind of go to the next slide. So the question was, okay, how do we split those costs up if we want to kind of come up with an irrigated versus non-irrigated? So the initial concept was we looked at sort of irrigated acres, non-irrigated acres, and it's not quite 50-50, but could we look at sort of the GSA administration costs, which are required? Could we split those costs evenly, 50-50 amongst the irrigators and non-irrigators? And then on the compliance costs, recognizing that the reporting is really mostly on the reason we're probably in the condition we are is because of the pumping. Could we kind of allocate more of those or shift those costs to the actual irrigators? So initially when we looked at that, we came up with this idea of 87.5% would be on the irrigators and 12.5% would be on the non-irrigators for the Sigma compliance, because there are things in the Sigma compliance that do have some of a benefit to the non-irrigators because there's reporting requirements. So that was kind of the idea, not to completely let them off the hook, but maybe they have less skin in the game. So that was the concept. So if you go to the next slide, and I'm sure you all have this memorized, but if you kind of look at this table, what we're doing here, if you look at the table on the top, this is the irrigated annual charge. So we kind of followed that methodology. And if you kind of look at that analysis, it works out to be about $6.47 for the irrigators. Again, they're covering 50% of the admin and about 87.5%, 90% of the compliance. And then you go to the bottom table, you look at this would be the cost for the non-irrigators, which is about $302 per acre. So again, it's $647 for the irrigators and $302 for the non-irrigators. If you go to the next slide, it kind of gives you a summary of what that looks like. My sort of understanding from talking to the county and Jacques, my colleague, was that didn't really go over very well. So that was kind of like, let's go back to the drawing board and come up with some different options. We think that irrigated fee of $302 is a bit high. I think it is important to note that, if the DWR grants are awarded, it would reduce the cost by about $1.15 per acre. And we're kind of hearing from DWR in the next couple of weeks, they're going to make that announcement. But again, just wanted to point that out there. So uniform fee, $453, everybody pays. Irrigated, non-irrigated, $647 on the irrigated, $302 on the non-irrigated. So if you go to the next slide, These are some of the concerns that came out of that April 27th board meeting, like I mentioned previously. We felt like the impact on the non-irrigators was too high. Ludolf, go back to the drawing board, and could we look at perhaps, within irrigated surface water versus groundwater, and maybe redistribute those costs a little more. I think there were some other discussions about maybe shifting the allocations to smaller parcels, capping the larger parcels, and then charging sort of a parcel-based valuation into the mix. I think those 3 bullets on the bottom, I don't think they're legally defensible, but I'll let legal counsel kind of chime in on those if that does come up. All right, so that's the background. If you go to the next slide. So today, what we really want to talk about is kind of present some of the results from our updated fee options analysis. So if you go to the next slide, so this presents sort of the initial allocation. So on the GSA admin costs, I'm trying to make this as exciting as possible, but I'm struggling a little bit. On the GSA administration costs, initially it was about a 50-50 split, right, for the admin costs. Then we talked about that 87.5%, 12.5% split for the compliance. We kind of shifted that now to sort of a 90-10. And so 90% of the admin and Sigma compliance would be on the irrigators, and then just be a 10% costs on the non-irrigators. If you go to the next slide, this kind of summarizes for the non-irrigators what those admin costs would look like. So you can see of the, at least on the compliance portion, I think they're paying about $12,500. So it's obviously substantially less than kind of what was initially sort of depicted. But again, just trying to balance that equity sort of challenge that we're up against. I think it's easier to kind of show examples. So I kind of want to get to the next slide. So let's kind of look at this next slide. And what we're looking at here, again, 2 tables. The table on the top is related to the irrigated charge. So if you kind of follow this model where 90% of the admin and compliance is put on the irrigators, and you share only 10% with the non-irrigators, what does that kind of look like? So you can see it looks like now on the irrigators are about $8.44 an acre, and then the non-irrigators, it shifts it down to about 97 cents an acre. Does that make sense? Okay, if you go to the next slide. So this was something else that we kind of decided to look at. We said, okay, well, within the irrigated class, we've got, pretty reliable information on who's irrigating with surface water, who's irrigating with groundwater. There's some mix in there. So the thought was, could we utilize this data to maybe refine the irrigated charge? So kind of split out the surface water, groundwater irrigators, recognizing that, folks that irrigate with surface water, they're not taking water out of the aquifer essentially. And there's a bit of a benefit because in a lot of these cases, the surface water folks, some of that water is recharged. So there's a benefit to the basin. So that was sort of the approach we're going to try to work through. And so if you go to the next slide, and then the next slide. I'm just kidding. No. So again, just to make sure everybody's on the same page, we've got the admin costs, Sigma costs, we're splitting it. So we're saying irrigators, regardless of surface water or groundwater, you're paying 90%. Non-irrigators, you're paying 10%. That was the original concept. So now what we're going to do, if you go to the next slide, we're going to shift it. So now what we're looking at here is, again, just to summarize, the irrigated surface water, groundwater is on the top table. Right now, the current fee is $8.44 an acre. And then the non-irrigators is 97 cents. If you flip to the next slide, that's kind of where we went, now where we're headed. So now what we're going to do is we're going to shift the admin and compliance costs. We're going to put 35% of the admin and compliance costs on the irrigated surface water, and then 65% on the irrigated groundwater, recognizing, groundwater users are taking water out of the system. Maybe they're having more impact on the overall system than the surface water body, so the surface water users. So now instead of a 90% split on the irrigated lands, we're going to split that 90%. So it's 65% on the irrigators, groundwater, and then 35% on the irrigated surface water, primarily because we feel like the surface water folks do provide a benefit. Is it 50%? I mean, that could be negotiated, but it gives them something, instead of an equal footing on the costs. So if we go to the next slide. Okay, there's a typo on this one, but essentially what we're looking at, if you look at the upper graph, or the upper table, what we're looking at here is this is the irrigated surface water charge. So as you recall, initially it was $8.44 for irrigated, regardless if you were surface water or groundwater. Now it brings it down to about $8 or $7.99. But now you need to make up that cost, so you shift those additional costs to the irrigators. So their irrigated fee went from $8.44 now to $10.69 an acre. That makes sense? We're just kind of shifting those costs. And if you go to the next slide, so this was another alternative that I think the county wanted us to look at, if I understand that correctly. And the idea was that everybody pays their fair share of the admin costs, but you shift the burden for the compliance costs all onto the irrigators for groundwater. So if you kind of run those numbers, what it does is it takes your groundwater irrigated fee, initially it was $8.44, and then it went to $10.69, right? So now it's going to bump it up even more because the irrigator groundwater are having to pay more of the fee. So it bumps it up to about $12.71. So that assumes that the non-irrigators and the surface water irrigators would only pay their fair share of the admin fee, but they would not pay any of the compliance fee. So you've kind of got this model of $8.44, $10.69, or $12.79 for the irrigated groundwater users. So if you go to the next slide, this kind of hopefully summarizes up what I've been mumbling about. So you've got the uniform fee, which was initially about $4.53 per acre. Then we shifted that. We said, no, we don't think that's equitable. Let's look at an irrigated, non-irrigated. And so that now breaks out to about $6.47 for the irrigators, doesn't differentiate between surface water and groundwater, and about $3.02 for the non-irrigated. The feedback was, hey, do you think that non-irrigated fee's too high? Go back to the drawing board. So now we've got, there's three new approaches, but essentially there's two in the sense that we're looking at now an irrigated, non-irrigated fee where we differentiate the cost. So we have 90% is on the backs of the irrigators and 10% on the non-irrigators. So that works out to about $8.44 surface water or groundwater irrigation and 97 cents for the non-irrigators. Or if we shift the model a little bit and we split the 90% cost allocation, we kind of differentiate. So it's 35% for the irrigated surface water and 65% for the irrigated groundwater. Again, recognizing that to give the surface waters surface water users a bit of credit because there is some recharge component. That shifts the irrigated surface water from $8.44 down to $7.99, and then the irrigated groundwater goes up from about $8.44 to $10.69, and then obviously the non-irrigated fee would not change. Is this all making sense? You guys following this? Okay.
Yeah, it's like falling on a sword.
No, I know. And so the next slide, really, and this would be included in the fee report, it just kind of gives sort of folks a sense of all these different charges we looked at, the ease of understanding, the ease of implementation, the equity, there'll be some additional GSA administration costs, and then also the most important part, does it provide the sufficient revenue source? And I think most of them do that. So it's just a matter of how do we select which one to go with. So if you go to the next slide, and this is where your job's going to get a little harder, what we're looking for really is some direction on where to go, because we need to kind of carry some of these options into the fee report. So we've got the flat fee. I think we all agree that's not really equitable. And so now what do we carry forward into the fee report? And so it could be, if you kind of go back to, I think the easiest way to sort of look at this, Cam, might be to go back to the slide that had sort of the summary of there you go. That's kind of what we're looking at is what direction do we go? And then we'll take that forward and include it in the fee report.
So you mentioned that looking at this in a different way probably wouldn't stand up in a court of law, but it seems like no matter what we do, it's going to get challenged in a court of law. So what about arguing the fact that by implementing Sigma, every individual will benefit, including their children and grandchildren, generationally in the future. And using that as an argument, just divide the fee by the parcels and everybody gets a bill. It wouldn't be that much. And they do have the benefit of having clean groundwater clear up into the future and don't worry about the size of the parcel.
Well, I think that's the uniform concept.
Yeah,
Well, yeah.
I'm not even
Yeah.
saying acreage.
You're saying
Just
parcels?
take the parcels and charge them
Yeah.
$20, whatever it is, a parcel, and say, we're saving your groundwater. This is a non-funded
Mandate?
mandate by the
Yeah.
state, and this is how we're going to do it. Would there be a court challenge? Maybe, but maybe that's, I mean, I want good, clean groundwater for my grandchildren, and some of them have a well and some of them don't, you know?
Right. Yeah, I mean,
Kyle and I have talked this over.
Yeah.
You know, I'm only allowed to talk to one guy, really.
no.
And
Yeah,
we've talked a lot about
Right.
trying to figure some way that, and justification is that the benefit is forever
Right.
for everybody. So wouldn't it be equitable to charge every single parcel just a flat fee? And
Yeah,
don't even get into the anchorage or non-irrigated or irrigated. And I understand that would be for legal to say, oh, you're crazy, we can't do it because there's this precedent in law, or is it something we want to set a precedent by doing that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Mr. Connolly
Oh,
saying.
yeah, there we go.
It's an unfunded state mandate, and I think everybody should be assessed, and we should broaden this out as far as we can broaden this out. Everybody benefits. I was at that financial meeting, and we talked about everybody benefits from Sigma, so everybody has skin in the game. Everybody should contribute. I absolutely agree.
I'm not checking my text. I'm just gonna pull my calculator out and just run a quick number, because we have the total parcels. I'm just
Right,
gonna.
just, and less like
Yeah.
40 or whatever.
Yeah, and then if legal counsel wants to jump in, or.
I do. This is Andrew Ramos.
Oh, please
Chair Connolly,
don't.
I declined to call you crazy because I think the concepts that you're describing are spot on, but unfortunately we still have to work within the confines of Prop 218 and Prop 26. And the sort of flat fee per parcel approach, I don't think it would pass muster under Prop 218 because Prop 218 requires this to be a real property-based fee with that proportionality element that we've discussed before. And I just don't think we would get satisfaction on the proportionality element without requiring some differentiation between parcel size, which I think is probably about the best we could do on tracking Sigma benefits with parcel size and assuring proportionality. So I appreciate the creativity, but I don't think it works, unfortunately.
Well, you have all the education, all the law books, make it work. That's a challenge.
I think the closest that you get from the options presented that I think would be viable is, as Eddie said, probably the uniform fee approach, the option one that the board discussed last time. It's probably about the closest you could get and still be within the realm of Prop 218.
It works out to about $21 a parcel, maybe. So,
Yeah, but everybody can afford $21, but if you get some marginal non-irrigated guy and you charge him $4,000 or $5,000, I don't know how many calves that is in a year, but
Yeah.
that's
I'm
struggle with it, man.
I think, is it on? Okay, sorry. I'm trying to understand how it is proportional to charge by the acre across the entire basin, but it's not proportional to do a flat parcel charge across the entire basin. It seems like it's the same legal basis for this. I mean, it seems like it's the same concept. Is it? What am I missing on that? I'm just trying to understand the difference between the two, I think.
Yeah, Andrew, that's you, man.
Sure, absolutely. And I appreciate the question, Director Daly. So the issue is when we are looking at a Prop 218 real property fee or charge, we're looking to say that the costs and burdens are reasonably proportional to the fee. And the argument goes that when we are looking at the uniform fee under option one that the consultant proposed last time, there's a rough proportionality between the benefits being provided to each parcel and the parcel size. Essentially, that small parcels are receiving less benefit, big parcels are receiving more benefit. There's some rough proportionality there that I think we can argue under Prop 218. That goes away if you propose a charge where every parcel is getting hit with the exact same fee. Small parcels would argue that they're being charged too much because that small parcel receives less of a Sigma benefit. And on the other side, nobody would make this argument on behalf of the big landowners, I suppose, but the argument would be that they're not being charged enough because they've received more benefit from Sigma compliance and the Sigma implementation that's being funded by the fee, but they've been charged too little by receiving a flat fee.
I understand. So I guess it depends on what it's proportional to. If we're talking benefit received in groundwater extraction, a half-acre lot with a domestic well would be receiving more benefit than a large parcel that extracted zero groundwater. So how do we decide which way how do we make it proportional? To what? Is it proportional to acreage owned? Is it proportional to benefit received in terms of groundwater extracted and used?
I want to interject a thought here. What's really difficult here is the Wyandotte GSA area doesn't have any major decline in water. It's been exercised and it's actually very, very helpful. So Sigma is like us. We as a county, we're ahead of the state in so many levels, studying our groundwater, not allowing export of it, not over pumping, all these things we did. So now we're being forced to tax people that really do not get a significant immediate benefit. This benefit that we're going to charge them with is in the future where climate change and or over pumping, population growth, many other things could come into effect. So where it's so difficult to sit here and say, we're giving you a proportional benefit when every farmer out there could go, hey, our water table's fine. It isn't declining right now. Everything's good. And that's why I come back to the original discussion that applying Sigma to Wyandotte GSA is for future benefit, and every single person that will move into it will benefit from the effort. And it seems like it would be applicable to charge every single parcel some sort of flat fee and get the acreage fee way down to where we're not damaging, say, a marginal cattle rancher, and not because my colleague's a cattle rancher, but because I know that they're on a small margin, or a small or irrigated person that's just put in an orchard that's not even benefiting yet for 3 to 5 years. So I keep coming back around. You say it's illegal, but it seems to me if all the facts were put in order, there isn't immediate, I'll argue again, there's not an immediate benefit for the people that we're going to tax with this. It's a future benefit. And and maybe, is there any other way than you keep referring to 218 that we can do this? Can we be like the first to do something as rational as charging a flat fee for future benefit and just a fee that might benefit people immediately, but like a smaller fee? Because I'm struggling really hard to look anybody in the eye and say, hey, Sigma's benefiting you right now. It just isn't there. And if anybody else has a thought, please join in or tell me I'm You can tell me I'm crazy. You got the books, you know.
Chair Conley, this is Andrew again. What you're describing is not illegal. It's not. Unfortunately, it's just not a Prop 218 real property related fee or charge. What it sounds like you're describing is more in the nature of a tax, which is not illegal under Prop 218. It's certainly possible. It's just it is subject to a different procedure than the one that we are proposing here. It'd be a special tax, and it would be subject to passage after a 2/3 majority vote of
A good chance for
the
that.
basin.
Well, you could threaten them though with what the state would do to them if they didn't pass it though.
Right. And again, what you're proposing is not illegal. It's just we determined early on that a special tax would probably be infeasible and took it off the table.
Regarding other basins that have adopted their fee structure with this legal basis that everybody benefits, that are now in litigation, do we, I'm just trying to understand how, I mean, we're gonna find out relatively quickly what is going to stand up in court and what won't. And so if other basins are now, you know, in litigation because of using this, should we do the same thing? Is it, or should we try and find a nuanced solution that might not be a uniform charge across the entire basin? Sorry, that's rambling. I'm just trying to understand why, if we want to do the same thing that other basins are already doing and are now being sued.
Andrew, are you aware of how many basins are being sued because of 218?
I'm not aware
It's
of
not
any
many.
218 challenges. The Tehama lawsuit that was recently filed, theirs was a regulatory fee, was my understanding, so it would be under 26, and it's a bit different than what's being proposed by the consultant for this basin. So Eddie, no, to your question, I'm not aware of any other 218 challenges that have been filed yet, which is not to say that there won't be challenges along the way. I suspect there will be. But I'm not aware of any against this concept right now.
Okay. Sorry, I was under the assumption that Tehama and I think Calusa's was not necessarily specific to the 218, but regarding the proportionality to like the burden put on non-irrigators was the basis for the litigation.
During for the GSP development, the Calusa Subbasin passed the 218, and there was litigation that came out of that from the rangeland folks. And my understanding is they worked out a solution.
They figured something out.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they waived the fee, but I don't have all the details for the rangeland folks.
I see. Okay. I think, yeah, just trying to, I mean, we have to do this. There's no question. It's not a matter of trying to get out of this, but I would prefer to take a little time now and find something that seems to be workable for everybody instead of getting down the road and just forcing something through, and then we end up getting hung up later on down the line. I think it behooves us to take a little time and try and get it right now. Or, yeah, however that sounds. So.
Politically, it's a disaster. I mean, I'll be honest, I haven't passed a fee. The biggest fee I ever got anybody to pass they voted on was a $11 a year alley cleaning fee. So this is huge. But you did say that they might have gave an exemption. Maybe we could work something out that people could apply if they're non-irrigated, just pasture land for an exemption or something like that. We'd have to raise the acre fee just a little bit everywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to shift it to the irrigators.
Is that the issue with the flat parcel fee, is that it's disproportionate for like smaller landowners? If it was a smaller, not a $21 parcel fee, like if it was $10 or $5, and then you put the remaining burden on the
Per acre.
like a groundwater.
So kind of a hybrid concept?
Is that something that, because I'm just throwing this out there just so we have some thoughts on it, but like a $10 parcel fee is $125,000. with like an $8 irrigated like crop acre, not, that's excluding the urban ground because that gets incredibly messy. So like actual groundwater extractors, that gets you to your $225,000.
I don't know legally, I don't know if legally that would pass muster and would it get the votes to
Yeah.
pass? I don't really know.
Okay, because it seems like it puts the burden on everybody in some way, but then it puts more of it on the irrigator, like the groundwater extractors. But I don't know. That's just a thought. And then if we got the DWR grants, it could be $5 a parcel and $5 per irrigated crop acre.
Yeah.
And that gets you to $125,000 annually. So I don't know. That's just, is that?
That makes too much
difference?
sense. We can't do that.
Yeah.
Is that something, what do you think about that, Andrew? Is it just because the large dollar amount for the per parcel acre that makes it not proportional?
I think that's right, Director Daly. The problem I have is when we talk about any sort of flat fee, it by its very nature shifts costs from whoever's getting the flat fee. It shifts the excess over the flat fee to other users, which has a proportionality problem. If you were to consider a concept that I think is sort of similar to what you're describing, one of the Ludorf and Scalmanini recommendations, sort of the new recommendations brought back to you today, is to use the more complicated hybrid approach that differentiates between the parcels and assigns costs based on extraction and extraction of groundwater specifically. I think that probably is the same concept that you're describing, but without a flat fee. And it's pretty close because it does place more burden on the extractors and less on the non-extractors.
Yep, I agree.
I guess I'm just thinking through this. I mean, it looks like the non-irrigators need to come up with about, I think it's $25,000. That's kind of, so I mean, the concept could be, you know what, non-irrigators pay nothing, then that burden just gets shifted to the irrigators. Sure. So I mean, it's a balancing act. And again, I think coming back to why we're here, I mean, we're not doing this out of the goodness of our heart. We've been forced to do it.
Yeah.
So.
Andrew, I have a quick question. Could we do a per parcel cost, but using parcel size to set tiers? Does that make sense? So it's kind of utilizing both. I can't take credit for that. Christina asked me.
It's the voting, though. It wouldn't pass. I don't think it would pass the votes. You need 2/3 vote, I think, to do that. Sorry, Andrew, didn't mean to step on your toes there, but.
No, and Cami, I want to make sure I understand the question. So are you saying that you'd have differentiated per acre fees depending on the overall size of the parcel? So, $1 for 10 and below, $2 for 10 and above, and $3 for 100 and above, or something like that, but with that sort of tiering?
Yes.
It would all depend on whether the consultant could put together a defensible proportionality analysis saying that there was a reason to create those tiers. This is the famous water rates case regarding tiered fees that those of us who live water know quite well. Tiering on fees is legally allowed so long as you have a rational basis. So if the consultant could come up with an explanation saying small parcels receive more benefit as a result of this than a large parcel would, and thus they should be charged a different amount per acre. If we could come up with some rational basis for that and put it in the report, then the answer is yes, you could do that.
Yeah, I think you have to look at the irrigated, non-irrigated. It has to be a factor, because if you have a large parcel that's irrigated, they get a bigger benefit than a large parcel that's not irrigated.
Right.
And I do think that comes back to my point before, is that, if land use is a factor in benefit received, then, it's a factor in benefit received. Like, and if an irrigated parcel is receiving more benefit, that means it's because of their groundwater extraction. So it seems like we're kind of saying the same thing, but I can't quite, and maybe it's me, but I just am kind of getting hung up on how a uniform acre charge is okay, but a uniform parcel charge is not. And are we considering land use or not?
Well, in the sense of irrigated versus non-irrigated,
Yeah.
we are.
And so that is an indicator of benefit received. If it's being irrigated, it's receiving more benefit than non-irrigated.
Right.
piece of
And
property.
then we took it a step further where we said, hey, we're recognizing surface water users have there's a recharge component to try to kind of bring that in. It's, it's a 50-cent
Right.
change or something, but, so we're trying.
And personally, as an aside, I think the South Feather and even Thermalito, in terms of like the surface water that they're bringing into the basin, is a net benefit. And I have a hard time thinking that that's going to, charging those folks, it seems like it's counterproductive in terms of what we're trying to do for the ultimate status of the basin. And if they're in the future if we can work with them to annex more into their area to where they're not relying on groundwater, then that's a benefit to the basin. And so charging them more money, it seems like we're kind of going backwards in terms of our ultimate sustainability goals.
Well, in one of those examples, they would be getting charged less than the groundwater pumpers.
Yeah.
Where does this board think of the 97 cents per acre? You still think that's too high?
Is that,
Non-irrigated?
I guess I don't quite understand, because the only one that we got to see broken down with and without DWR grants was the flat uniform charge. So does that mean that if we get grant funding and we are able to fill the data gaps and do some of those projects that help with the compliance of it, is that in perpetuity, and then it would come down to $125,000 annually, or how is it? Because is it for the 1 year, or is
I think it's 4 years?
Three.
3 years?
3 years, because the grant funding needs to be spent by 2026. So the remaining 2 years of the kind of the 5-year budget planning horizon would be, the fee would go back up.
Back up.
Yeah.
right? And so it feels a little bit like we're trying to compare apples and oranges sometimes, where it's like, are we looking at it with grant funding, or are we not? And
Without now.
without,
Without,
yeah.
because we don't know even what portion of the grant would be funded. We're kind of making an assumption that some of the Sigma compliance things would be funding, but we don't know until we hear back from DWR.
Yeah. Well, obviously, it's more palatable to me than the other two options. I mean, it seems to put more of the burden on the irrigators. There's just it's still a lot of money for people that aren't, receiving more benefit
Right.
for, paying that amount of money. So that is the hang up for us. Yeah.
But conversely, point out an example of the proportionality is if you have rangeland running cattle, you're paying 97 cents and you have 1,000 acres. That's your fee. If someone has 1,000 acres of walnuts or almonds, they're going to be paying a ton more because they're irrigated. So that's that proportionality. Whereas if you were both paying $20, they're getting a stream deal and you're getting not,
Right.
because you're essentially subsidizing their usage and
Well,
their benefit.
I
If,
agree.
if there was declining groundwater and there was a benefit immediately, but there's
I'm
not.
saying strictly in the bounds of
The law,
reality of 280.
Right.
yeah, the law, I understand that, but the reality is, if I got a rice farmer out there and he gets a bill for $8,000, he's not gonna be happy with me. He's gotta be gone.
But I do agree with you, Chris, that.
I agree too,
yeah.
on that
Yeah.
concept.
And so,
Just as an example.
yeah, and so I think that flat per parcel rate across everybody. I think it was more an example of,
What not to do.
or, well, more of like if the basis that we're using is that everybody's benefiting within the basin, then, you know, could we do that? But if it's based off of land use, and land use is an indicator of benefit received, then we've got to figure out a way to proportionally put the burden on the people that are using the groundwater.
I think that's somewhat the purpose of having the difference between irrigated surface water and keeping in mind that irrigated surface water land uses also include the urban areas and the city of Oroville and the residents of Thermalito and even South Feather, and Cal Water users. So irrigated surface water users paying slightly less than irrigated groundwater because it's different surface water users. The surface water comes from outside of the basin boundaries, and that was one of the reasons why we had them look at it in a little more detail.
So it's a benefit that we're bringing that water into the basin.
Right.
though.
And keep in mind too, that, we're just looking at a 5-year planning horizon over time. And some of the things that we've talked about with some of the projects and management actions is, for example, South Feather bringing some of their surface water to be used by groundwater users. I mean, South Feather has excess surface water, and we do have ways that we could get it into other areas of the basin. So, over time, if, let's say, irrigated surface water users were paying less than those that previously used groundwater, we can look at it more closely over time. This is kind of to get us through this first hurdle,
Yeah.
and then play with it.
I'd like to, a couple of comments, I guess, if you will. I still haven't decided what is the best way to do it, but I think that we, as a board, as Mr. Conley has mentioned, this is for future, for the future. And the second thing is that we should, whatever we do here, we should make sure that we're funding it solely without the state grant. If we rely upon that grant for any of our funding and it doesn't come through, where are we? And the grant's going to run out in, a few years, and then we'll have to be funding ourselves. So why not build a program that funds ourselves right now? And so if the grant comes through, it's extra. I don't like this idea of spending money we don't have, if you will.
So what's your motion?
I don't have a motion yet.
I don't know.
I mean, it seems like the uniform flat fee you all were not in supportive of, and I'm kind of hearing that same message today. Recognize that it's not equitable. So the uniform fee sounds like is off the table. I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but that's kind of what I'm hearing.
I don't think it's not equitable. I just think it won't pass.
Well, yeah.
But I think we're talking about a future benefit to every citizen and their descendants more than we're talking about immediate benefit for anyone. And I even have trouble with, although it's illegal under 218, sending somebody a $4,000 bill for irrigating 500 acres.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to be happy, and I don't blame them.
What's Thermalito's preference in terms of the options that were given us?
Well, and they make the decision.
Defer to me.
Yeah, instead of me giving my opinion, whereas you're the
Right. Well, and I think I feel very strongly that the one thing that we do is we need to make sure that we're within the guidelines of 218. That's number one. And number two is a lot of these programs are options that differentiate between irrigated, non-irrigated, and city versus rural and all that type of thing. Does that go back to not everybody receiving the same benefit? And doesn't 218 require that everybody in the area that we're trying to support get the same benefit and pay the same, even if it's prorated, pay the same amount of money across the board? Am I wrong about that, or?
In a nutshell, not to put, to take over Andrew's expertise, but basically 218 says what you pay has to be proportional to your benefit. That's the crux of 218.
Right. That's where I was trying to go. Thank you.
Which I think we're doing in the sort of the irrigated, non-irrigated version 1, because a non-irrigator
I would agree
gets less of a benefit than the irrigators who are using the source. That was the concept.
Yeah.
And you could make the argument that surface water, groundwater should be different because they have different benefits. You could also argue that surface water and groundwater they're not mutually exclusive, that they do interact with each other, and that so whether you use surface water or groundwater, you should pay the same. So I don't think there's a sticking point as far as between the two irrigated versus non-irrigated of whether either of those will pass the 218. I think it's really, we're just looking for direction from you all, the board, as to, tell the consultant, what are you going to put in your fee report so we can approve it next week and get the wheels in motion?
Right. I strongly feel that we don't need to differentiate between irrigated, non-irrigated. We go back to, as we mentioned earlier, proportional benefit. But I guess that goes right back to non-irrigated and irrigated, doesn't it? I've just completed the circle, but just make sure that we do it proportional. Yeah.
Well, there's a definite recharge component when you use surface water and you flood irrigate. So I can see giving them a break. And it's been proven where they've changed from flood or sprinkler irrigation to micro irrigation that the groundwater declined, depending on the soil type. But generally in our area, we don't have the clay that's out in the valley, so if somebody's growing rice, they're recharging, and they're growing anything where they flood irrigate, they're helping recharge. So I think that's fair. I'm willing, whatever we do, I know we have to do it, but I don't want to make the motion. Somebody else is just going to have to.
I will note that you could move just one of these forward or two. Don't move all four, because we're just going to be having this conversation over again, but you can choose one or
Can we
two.
take the uniform flat rate option off of the table? The $4.53?
Yeah, I agree with that. Do we get rid of the
Yes.
flat fee?
Yes.
You give it that, Bill?
No,
Oh, you like it best?
I would keep that, but whatever you want to do is fine.
No, it's 3-1.
I just want to spread it out, that's all.
No, I know.
Like,
and
if
I-
you think legally it won't,
the
stand up.
lawyer's saying we'd have to go to a vote, we'd have to get 2/3 of the vote. Do I believe we could pass that? If we spent a lot of money doing mailers and showing people what happens if the state comes in and they impose a fee, we might be able to pass it. But,
Pass a parcel fee or?
yeah, it's a
Yeah,
flat parcel
right.
fee, but why would anyone living in town vote for that? So you probably couldn't get 2/3, because they wouldn't be impacted by what the state's gonna do. So I'm going in a circle too. I think it's off the table. Sorry.
I was talking about the $4.53 per acre,
Yeah, you want,
per acre option.
Right.
Now you have 3 to,
so you want to leave the middle two?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, from my perspective, I think the irrigated, non-irrigated one option with the 844, or the 90-10 split, where it puts more of the burden on the groundwater extractors, I mean, I think that's better than the other options in terms of proportionality, if that's what we require. I don't think anybody's gonna be happy with it still, just because I think their argument is gonna be that there's there's no benefit received, they're not extracting groundwater. And I think
Yeah.
that's where people are gonna be at, one way or the other. So,
I think, and I've heard this several times, I mean, the benefit you need to remember is compliance. And it's hard to
Yeah.
sell that, but it's true if.
I don't know.
Yeah. I
What
mean,
they're going to do to you if we don't do it.
Exactly.
And that's really hard to explain.
Yeah.
It gets very complicated.
it gets more complicated in this basin than in, let's say, for example, Vienna GSA, right? Because pretty much everyone is a groundwater user. So but Sigma compliance is what we are. We have this state mandate and we need to comply with Sigma and we need to implement our GSP and we need to administer the GSA, and everybody in the basin does benefit from that to some, even the non-irrigators.
I think another thing, again, because you all are interacting with the public, is, you all have done a very good job of trying to get your GSP admin and implementation costs low. In fact, I don't know of a lower GSP admin and GSP implementation overall cost in the state.
It's just we don't have
Yeah.
a
No,
large enough area.
right, but what I'm
Yeah.
saying is you've done your due diligence to get that as low as possible.
It's too bad we weren't about 4 times bigger.
Yeah.
Actually.
So,
So what are you thinking, Kyle? The irrigated, non-irrigated 844, and then the irrigated, non-irrigated 799?
yeah, I
Those
think.
two?
Think so. In the irrigated, non-irrigated, the first option of the 844 and the 97 cents is surface water irrigators included in that.
Yeah, that's
That-
what it's, the top one's the surface, and
Yeah.
the other one, they go to 799, and the irrigated goes to 1069.
Yeah, so irrigated, non-irrigated, one is surface and groundwater irrigated are together, and that includes urban, ag, irrigated.
Yeah. I mean, of these options, that would be my preference, but I going along kicking and screaming.
Which one?
The 844 and 97 cents.
the one with, says number one,
Correct.
yeah. And we've determined that the number one plan will fund us if we don't get a grant?
Yeah, these are all based on.
Oh,
full
funded
funding.
without, yeah.
Your concerns are valid, but they're already included, every one of them include full funding.
Right.
Not depending on the grant.
Yeah, I saw that on here, I just, I don't know. Just wanted to make sure, I guess. I would go, I'll make a motion that we approve, to start with anyway, we approve the program titled Irrigation, Non-Irrigation Number One as our first choice for a funding program. I make a motion.
Somebody's got to second it, it's gonna die.
I'll second it.
All right, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
No.
No. All right, so I make a motion that we accept both of the last two options. I usually don't do this as a chair, but, and bring it back, because when this hits the streets, we'll have a lot of public discussion, that's what I'm thinking.
So what that means is that
Both
at your
those.
next meeting, you will be just looking at both of those in more detail, and then that's what you would, one of the two is what you would review and approve for the fee. So you'll have additional detail about that, and that's what would be moved forward for
Anybody
the fee.
second that one?
Well, if you would like, if you want to withdraw your motion, I'd be more than happy to make
Go
that
ahead.
motion.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I make a motion that we accept both number 1 and number 2 plans.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? No. Passed unanimously. Okay, so now I'm going to ask a question, and I already probably know the answer. If you were the public, I would never ask this question, but can we fiddle a little bit with the numbers next time? Like, can we go to $1 on the non-irrigated, and I don't know, just something to think about.
Yeah, I mean, those numbers are going to adjust a little bit because now we do have the latest parcel data. So, I mean, we can adjust it or round it up, kind of thing.
Because I don't think the non-irrigated guys are gonna gripe if we bumped them just a little bit and take a little bit of burden off the other two.
Yeah, I mean, we can run the numbers and see. We can't reverse engineer it, but we can sort of look at the parcel data and see.
Because you have a formula you're going by, and
Right.
so, yeah,
Right.
I'm just thinking.
Yeah.
Is there any other business before us today? Not, we're adjourned. I gotta go sheriff's substation in Chico. Anybody wanna go? No volunteers?
I gotta go to court.
Thanks, Christina. Thanks, Andrew, for participating.
Oh, my gosh.